Hey, scholars. Hope you're having a good weekend. I just got back from an 11-mile run. This is not the shirt I wore on the 11-mile run, but it's comfortable. This chair is comfortable. So here's where my video on forecasting will emanate from. So within forecasting, let's talk about it for a minute. What is forecasting? Why do we do forecasting? What do we use a forecast for? And of course, regression analysis. So let's start with what is forecasting. It's a prediction of the future events around whatever parameters we want to do a forecast on. In the Disney example, the parameter that was forecast for the CEO was one number. It was just the attendance. How many people are coming into my parks? Now, they've got it figured out to, 3 years out, they've got a 0 to 3% margin of error in their forecast. That's pretty dang incredible. So what do they use that for? The CEO uses it to say, okay, well, am I happy or sad with what's going on in my business? Did everything happen the way I thought it was going to? But then within the organization, the hot dog, the manager of the hot dog, food and beverage manager is ordering food for his organizations or her organizations. They're determining how to queue up things in the park. Lots of decisions are made based on how many people are going to be in the park. There's a rhythm to numbers, and weekends are going to be busier than the weeks. Anytime that school's out, it's going to be busier than the time when school's in at Disney. So it's not like it's all magic where you put numbers in and some interesting set of algorithms kicks out a number that nobody would have figured out otherwise. It's probably not the way it works, but it is something that allows the Disney team to really run the parks the way they run them. And it's a $50 billion business. In the text, I believe it. We talked about timelines of forecasting. In operations management, we need to worry about long-range forecast 3 years or more once in a while. The plant manager probably doesn't need to worry about it that much. The VP of operations needs to worry about it more because there's decisions that need to be made that far out. When are we going to hit capacity? When do we need to open a plant, close a plant, move to China, move things back to the United States? All those decisions that operations managers make. Mid-range forecast, 3 months to 3 years. What are you going to use that information for? Do I need an extra shift? Do I need to hire new people? Do I need to be thinking about laying off people? Do I need new equipment? Do I need to upgrade my equipment so it works more efficiently, etc.? Short-term forecast. I look at that as tomorrow, up to a few months, maybe 6 months. And what do we use that for? I'll give you the example of my buddy in class who ran the company, the factory that put grills together. And they had I don't remember how many pieces, 87 pieces in each grill. Well, if they had one little screw that wasn't there, line shut down. Because you can't send out a grill that needs 87 pieces if there's only 86 of them in the box. Of course, that happens a lot, or used to happen a lot, but there's no way to run an operation. So short-range forecast is critically important so that you're sure you've got everything that you need in-house to do your job, which is what does an operations manager do? They take goods and services and they transform them into something that's more valuable. We talked about how forecasts are made. And I gave you the example of the restaurant that I did the analysis on. Excuse me. And you got to have some fundamentals that you're working with. In the restaurant, we wanted to see how much revenue we were going to do. Was it a good business decision or wasn't it a good business decision? So what did we do? We looked at how many customers do we expect to have in, how much are they each going to spend, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. By month, how many days are there in a month? From that, we could look at, okay, so we know what the revenue is. How many employees do we need? What's our food cost as a percentage of revenue? I think it was about 30%. A little less than that at Denny's. So we can figure out what our cost of goods sold are, what our operating expenses are, and we can figure out what our margins are and our EBITDA. So that's another type of forecast that's used in business analysis and business decision making. Let's talk for a minute about regression analysis. What is regression analysis? It's essentially linear regression analysis is forecasting a line. It's formula for a line. You'll learn this in 8th grade. Y equals mx plus b. So the y, or the slope of the line, is determined by the magnitude of the x variable that we're also including in the forecast. So the regression analysis essentially says that given a series of data points, the best fit line is the least squared line, they call it, but it's the line that has the least amount of variability in it between all of the data points. And then the slope of that line is going to be determined by that formula, by those data points. The closer the data points are to the actual line, the lower something called an R-squared is going to be. And the R-squared is used to determine how correlated your forecast is to the data. So if you had a forecast where the dots in the line were exactly the same, so the line goes right on those dots, that would be an R-squared of 1. If you had a forecast that was all over the place and there wasn't much correlation at all, you're going to have a lower R-squared up to a low R-squared of a low of 0. So as a general rule, the higher R-squared, the higher the correlation of the data is to the forecast. Gave the example in class of the pizza franchise, in the way we could forecast the cost of a pizza to the customer, and that basically showed us that the higher R-squared, or the 1 R-squared, which is where for each ingredient added, it added $1 to the cost of the pizza. So you know, if a pizza starts at a $10 base and you add 3 ingredients, it's going to cost $13. Easy enough, but then you add things like in the second example, you had things like discounts and early bird specials and different ingredients costing different amounts of money. That formula is going to not work quite as well. Formula being where you multiply the number of toppings you put on the pizza times the number of pizzas plus times $10 per pizza, you'd wind up with a pretty good forecast how much your revenue would be. Well, you couldn't do that with the second example, and consequently and subsequently your R-squared is going to be much lower. So that's about it on forecasting. That's an interesting chapter, I think, so read it again, and we'll see y'all later.